8-year-old Emma sat propped up against her hospital bed pillows, her thin fingers tracing the pictures in her favorite storybook about brave knights in royal castles. The afternoon sun streamed through the window of the children's ward, casting warm light across her pale face. Despite the tubes and wires that had become her constant companions over the past 6 months, her eyes still sparkled with the same curiosity that had always defined her. "Mama, do you think the Queen's guards are really as tall as the book says?" Emma asked, looking up at her mother, Sarah, who was knitting in the chair beside her bed. Sarah's hands paused for a moment, her heart clenching at the innocent question. The doctors had been clear about Emma's condition. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia had progressed despite aggressive treatment, and they were now focusing on keeping her comfortable. "I'm sure they are, sweetheart," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "They have to be tall and strong to protect the palace." Emma's father, David, walked into the room carrying 2 cups of coffee and a small bag of Emma's favorite cookies from the hospital cafeteria. He had taken leave from his job at the accounting firm 3 months ago to spend every possible moment with his daughter. The family's savings were nearly depleted, but nothing mattered more than being there for Emma. "Dad, did you know that the royal guards wear big black hats called bearskin caps?" Emma said excitedly, showing him a picture in her book. "And they carry swords and everything. Mrs. Patterson says they guard Buckingham Palace every single day." David sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the IV line. Mrs. Patterson was Emma's favorite nurse, a kind woman in her 50s who always had time to answer Emma's endless questions about the world beyond the hospital walls. She had been sharing stories about London and the royal family during Emma's treatments, helping to distract her from the pain and discomfort. "They sound very important," David said, gently stroking Emma's hair, which had grown back in soft, wispy patches after her last round of chemotherapy. "Maybe someday we'll take a trip to London and see them ourselves." Emma's eyes lit up with a brightness that reminded her parents of the healthy, energetic child she had been before the diagnosis. "Really, do you promise, Dad?" The question hung in the air like a weight. Sarah and David exchanged a glance over Emma's head, both knowing that such a trip would likely never be possible. The medical bills had consumed their travel fund, their mortgage was behind, and Emma's condition was deteriorating despite the brave face she put on each day. "We'll see what we can do, Princess," David whispered, kissing the top of her head. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching her storybook, Sarah and David sat in the hospital corridor outside her room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the familiar sounds of the children's ward, beeping monitors, soft conversations, and the occasional cry, filled the silence between them. "She's getting weaker," Sarah said quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Did you see how tired she got just from sitting up to eat lunch?" David nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The oncologist had spoken with them earlier that day, explaining that Emma's latest test results showed the cancer had spread further. They were looking at weeks, maybe a couple of months, rather than the years they had once hoped for. "All she talks about are those guards," Sarah continued. "She's memorized everything about them from that book. Did you know she asked Mrs. Patterson to find pictures of the changing of the guard ceremony on the internet yesterday? Maybe we should try to contact someone," David suggested suddenly. "I know it sounds crazy, but what if we reached out to the British Embassy or wrote a letter to someone at Buckingham Palace? The worst they can do is say no." Sarah looked at her husband with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "David, we're just ordinary people from a small town in Ohio. Why would they care about one little girl's wish?" "Because," David said, taking his wife's hand, "sometimes ordinary people doing extraordinary things is exactly what the world needs. Emma deserves to have at least one dream come true." As they sat there in the quiet hospital hallway, neither of them could have imagined that Emma's simple wish would soon touch the hearts of people across 2 continents, or that their daughter's story would become a beacon of hope for families facing similar struggles. The journey that would transform their lives was about to begin with a single letter, written by a desperate father who refused to let his daughter's dream die along with everything else they were losing. David sat at the small desk in the hospital's family lounge at 2 in the morning, staring at a blank piece of paper. The words seemed impossible to find. How do you explain to strangers that your daughter is dying? How do you ask for a miracle without sounding like you're begging? He had spent the past week researching contact information for anyone who might be able to help. The British Embassy in Washington, various charitable organizations, even the official Buckingham Palace mailing address. Mrs. Patterson had helped him find email addresses for several military regiments responsible for royal duties. "Dear Sir or Madam," he began, then crumpled up the paper. Too formal. He tried again. "My name is David Morrison, and I am writing about my 8-year-old daughter, Emma." Better. More personal. The letter grew longer as David poured his heart onto the page. He wrote about Emma's diagnosis, about her fascination with the royal guards, about the way she would light up whenever she talked about their ceremonies and traditions. He described her collection of pictures that Mrs. Patterson had printed from the internet, how Emma had memorized the names of different regiments and could recite facts about the Tower of London from memory. "Emma has always been fascinated by stories of courage and honor," David wrote. "Even now, when she's scared about her treatments, she talks about how brave the guards must be to stand so still and protect something so important. She says she wants to be that brave too." He included a recent photo of Emma in her hospital bed, holding her storybook and wearing the small plastic tiara that one of her nurses had brought her. She was smiling, but David could see the fragility in her thin frame, the way the hospital gown seemed to swallow her small body. The hardest part was explaining her prognosis without making the letter sound like a final request. "The doctors have told us that Emma's time may be limited," he wrote carefully. "We are hoping and praying for more good days with our daughter, but we also want to make sure she experiences as much joy as possible while she's with us." David made copies of the letter and mailed them to 15 different addresses. He sent emails to military personnel, charitable organizations, and anyone else he could think of who might have connections to the royal household. He didn't expect responses from most of them, but he had to try something. 2 weeks passed without any replies. Emma continued her treatments, though they were now focused more on comfort than cure. She had developed a new routine of asking Mrs. Patterson to read her news articles about the royal family during her afternoon rest time. The nurse had become like a grandmother to Emma, bringing her small gifts and spending her breaks in Emma's room. "Mr. Morrison, there's a phone call for you at the nurse's station," Mrs. Patterson said one Thursday afternoon. David looked up from the magazine he wasn't really reading, his heart immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios. Phone calls in the hospital rarely brought good news. He walked to the desk where the unit secretary handed him the phone with a puzzled expression. "They said it was about Emma, but it's a long-distance call. International, I think. Hello?" David said cautiously. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morrison. My name is Captain James Whitfield of the Grenadier Guards. I received your letter about your daughter Emma." David nearly dropped the phone. His hands began to shake as he gripped it tighter. "Yes, sir. Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure if anyone would actually read it." "We read every letter that comes to us, especially ones like yours," Captain Whitfield said, his British accent crisp but warm. "I've spoken with my commanding officer, and we would very much like to do something special for Emma. Would it be possible for us to arrange a video call with her? We thought perhaps some of our guardsmen could speak with her about their duties." David's eyes filled with tears. "She would be absolutely thrilled. Captain, I can't tell you what this means to our family. There's more, actually," Captain Whitfield continued. "We've been in touch with some other organizations here in London. There's a children's charity that specializes in granting wishes for seriously ill children. They've offered to coordinate something bigger if Emma is well enough to travel." The possibility seemed too overwhelming to consider. "Travel? You mean to London?" "That's exactly what I mean, Mr. Morrison. We can't promise anything definitive yet, but we're exploring the possibility of bringing Emma and your family here so she can see the changing of the guard ceremony in person. She could meet some of the guards, perhaps even visit the Tower of London." David sank into a chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "Captain, our daughter is very sick. The doctors don't think she has much time left." "We understand that, sir, which is why, if this is going to happen, we need to move quickly. Can you speak with her medical team about the possibility of travel? We have connections with medical transport services, and there are excellent pediatric facilities here in London that could provide any care she might need during the visit." After the call ended, David sat staring at the phone for several minutes. Mrs. Patterson found him there 20 minutes later, still in shock. "Good news or bad news?" she asked gently. "I think it might be the best news we've had in a very long time," David whispered, "but I'm afraid to believe it's real." When he told Sarah about the conversation, she initially thought he was joking. The idea that strangers thousands of miles away would care so much about their daughter seemed impossible. But as David showed her the email that had arrived from Captain Whitfield with more details, Sarah began to realize that Emma's simple wish had somehow reached exactly the right people at exactly the right time. Emma couldn't stop fidgeting with excitement as Mrs. Patterson adjusted the laptop computer on her bedside table. The video call was scheduled for 3 o'clock, and she had been awake since dawn, barely touching her breakfast and asking every 10 minutes if it was time yet. "Remember what we practiced?" "Sweetheart," Sarah said, smoothing Emma's hair. They had spent the morning rehearsing questions Emma wanted to ask the guards. She had prepared a list written in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, with Mrs. Patterson's help spelling some of the harder words. "Do the hats really weigh as much as a bowling ball?" Emma read from her paper. "How long do you have to stand without moving? Have you ever seen the Queen up close?" She looked up at her parents. "Do you think they'll really answer all my questions?" "I'm sure they will, Princess," David said, though he was nearly as nervous as Emma. The reality that his desperate letter had led to this moment still seemed surreal. Dr. Amanda Chen, Emma's oncologist, had initially been hesitant about the video call. Emma had been having more difficult days recently, and her energy levels were unpredictable. But she had seen how much the prospect had brightened Emma's spirits over the past week, and she knew that happiness could be its own form of medicine. "The internet connection should be good," the hospital's IT specialist said, finishing his setup of the equipment. "We've got backup systems ready in case there are any problems." At exactly 3 o'clock, the computer screen flickered to life. Emma gasped as she saw not one but 4 men in full ceremonial uniform appear on the screen. They were standing in what looked like an official military building, with flags and portraits visible in the background. "Good afternoon, Emma," said the man in the center, who wore slightly different insignia from the others. "I'm Captain Whitfield. These are Guardsmen Thompson, Davies, and Martinez. We're very excited to meet you." Emma's eyes went wide. The guards looked exactly like the pictures in her book, but somehow more impressive on the screen. Their red tunics were perfectly pressed, their boots gleamed, and their bearing was exactly as dignified as she had imagined. "Hello," Emma whispered, suddenly shy despite all her preparation. "We heard you're quite interested in the work we do," Guardsman Thompson said with a gentle smile. "Captain Whitfield told us you know quite a bit about our ceremonies already." Emma's shyness melted away as she launched into her prepared questions. The guards patiently answered each one, and Emma's delight grew with every response. Yes, the bearskin caps were heavy, about 2 pounds each. Yes, they had to stand very still during ceremonies, sometimes for over an hour. And yes, they had all seen the Queen, though they maintained professional distance during their duties. "Can I show you something?" Emma asked suddenly, reaching for her storybook. She held up the page showing the changing of the guard ceremony. "This is my favorite picture. Mrs. Patterson printed me lots more from the computer." "That's a lovely picture," Guardsman Davies said. "That ceremony happens every other day during winter and daily during summer. Would you like to know a secret about it?" Emma nodded eagerly. "Sometimes when we're standing at attention, we play little games in our heads to pass the time. We might count things we can see or try to remember all the words to songs. It helps us stay focused and alert." "What's your favorite song to think about?" Emma asked. The guards exchanged glances and smiled. "Well, we all have different favorites, but there's one we all know." Guardsman Martinez began to hum a familiar tune, and the others joined in. Emma clapped her hands with delight when she recognized "It's a Small World." The conversation continued for nearly an hour. The guards showed Emma some of their equipment, explained their daily routines, and even demonstrated how they performed certain ceremonial movements. Emma asked if she could see their swords, and they carefully displayed their ceremonial weapons. Explaining their historical significance, "We have something we'd like to ask you," Captain Whitfield said as the call began to wind down. "Would you be interested in meeting us in person? We've been working with some very kind people here in London, and we think we might be able to arrange for you and your family to visit us." Emma looked at her parents with an expression of pure wonder. "Really? I could come to London and see you for real? If your doctors say it's safe for you to travel, and if your parents think it's a good idea, then yes. We would be honored to have you as our special guest." After the call ended, Emma was more animated than she had been in weeks. She immediately began planning what she would wear to meet the guards in person, and asked Mrs. Patterson to help her learn more about London so she would be prepared for the visit. Dr. Chen met with Sarah and David that evening to discuss the medical implications of international travel. Emma's condition was serious, but she was currently stable. With proper medical support and careful planning, a short trip might be possible. "I have to be honest with you," Dr. Chen said. "Emma is living on borrowed time, but I've seen cases where children rally when they have something to look forward to. The psychological benefits of this trip could be significant." That night, as Emma slept more peacefully than she had in months, Sarah and David sat up late making lists of everything they would need to arrange. Passports, medical records, travel insurance, arrangements for David's work. The logistics seemed overwhelming, but they were determined to make it happen. "She was so happy today," Sarah said. "Did you see how she lit up when they were talking to her? It was like watching our old Emma come back." David nodded, remembering the sparkle in his daughter's eyes. Captain Whitfield mentioned that other people wanted to help make this happen. "I wonder who else is involved." Neither of them could have predicted that Emma's story was already spreading far beyond the military base where the guards were stationed. The video call had been just the beginning of something much larger. As word of the brave little girl who dreamed of meeting royal guards began to reach people who had the power to make extraordinary things happen, Captain Whitfield had not expected his phone to ring so frequently in the days following Emma's video call. The first call came from Margaret Hensley, director of the Make Dreams Come True Foundation, a London-based charity that specialized in granting wishes for terminally ill children. "Captain, I understand you've been working with an American family regarding a visit to London," Mrs. Hensley said during their conversation. "One of my board members heard about the little girl from a colleague at the Ministry of Defense. We'd like to offer our assistance." Within hours, Mrs. Hensley had assembled what she called her miracle team. The foundation had connections throughout London's tourism industry, relationships with airlines that sometimes donated flights for medical cases, and partnerships with hospitals that could provide care for visiting children with serious illnesses. But the real surprise came from an unexpected source. Sir Richard Pemberton, a wealthy businessman who had made his fortune in international logistics, had heard about Emma's story through his daughter, who worked as a pediatric nurse at Great Ormond Street Hospital. "I have granddaughters Emma's age," Sir Richard explained during a conference call with Mrs. Hensley and Captain Whitfield. "When I heard about this brave little girl who just wants to meet some guards, I knew I had to help. My company can handle all the transportation arrangements, flights, ground transport, everything. No family should have to worry about logistics when their child is facing what this family is facing." The generosity didn't stop there. Dr. Sarah Mitchell at Great Ormond Street Hospital volunteered to coordinate Emma's medical care during the visit. She had experience working with American insurance companies and international medical transfers, and she understood the specific needs of pediatric cancer patients. "We can provide whatever medical support Emma needs during her stay," Dr. Mitchell assured David during a video call. "We have partnerships with several lovely hotels that can accommodate medical equipment if necessary, and our ambulance service can provide transportation between activities if Emma gets tired." Meanwhile, back in Ohio, Emma's story was spreading through their local community in unexpected ways. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned Emma's upcoming trip to a few of her colleagues, and word had traveled quickly through the hospital staff. Soon, nurses and doctors from other departments were stopping by Emma's room to hear about her adventure. The local newspaper ran a small story about Emma's wish after a hospital. Administrator mentioned it during a community board meeting. The article caught the attention of Tom Bradley, owner of Bradley's travel agency, who had been looking for a way to give back to his community. "I read about Emma's story in the paper," Tom told David over the phone. "I've been running this agency for 30 years, and I've never handled anything more important than this trip. I want to take care of all the travel arrangements on this end, passports, documentation, travel insurance. Consider it my contribution to Emma's dream." Sarah was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from people they barely knew. "I don't understand why strangers care so much about Emma," she confided to Mrs. Patterson during one of Emma's treatment sessions. "Sometimes," Mrs. Patterson replied, "a child's innocence and courage reminds adults what's really important in life. Emma's story isn't just about meeting guards, it's about hope and dreams and the idea that good things can still happen even in the darkest times." The coordination between London and Ohio became increasingly sophisticated as the trip took shape. Mrs. Hensley created a detailed itinerary that would maximize Emma's experience while minimizing physical strain. The visit would last 4 days with careful attention to Emma's energy levels and medical needs. The centerpiece would be a private meeting with the guards at Wellington Barracks, followed by a special viewing of the changing of the guard ceremony from a reserved area where Emma could sit comfortably, but the team had planned additional surprises. A private tour of the Tower of London after hours when crowds would be minimal. Afternoon tea at a hotel near Buckingham Palace, and a boat ride on the Thames to see London from the water. "We want Emma to have the full London experience," Mrs. Hensley explained during a planning call, "but we also want to make sure she's not overwhelmed or exhausted." Dr. Chen had been working closely with Dr. Mitchell to ensure continuity of care. Emma's medications would be available in London, and both hospitals had Emma's complete medical records. Emergency protocols were established, though everyone hoped they wouldn't be needed. "Medically speaking, Emma is as stable as we could hope for right now," Dr. Chen told the family. "Her last scan showed no significant progression, and her energy levels have actually improved since she started planning this trip. I think the anticipation is working better than some of our medications." Emma herself was blissfully unaware of all the coordination happening around her. She spent her days studying maps of London, practicing her British accent with Mrs. Patterson, and drawing pictures of herself standing next to the guards. She had become something of a celebrity in the children's ward, with other young patients asking her to tell them about her upcoming adventure. "I'm going to remember every single thing," Emma told her roommate, a 6-year-old named Katie who was recovering from surgery, "and when I come back I'll tell you all about the guards and the palace and everything." The date was set for the following month, allowing time for final medical clearances and travel preparations. But as the departure date approached, Emma began experiencing more fatigue during her daily activities. Dr. Chen assured the family that this was expected given her condition, but privately, she worried about whether Emma would have the strength for such an ambitious trip. "We may need to adjust some of the activities once we're there," Dr. Chen advised Sarah and David. "But even if Emma only manages half of what's planned, it will still be an incredible experience for her." What none of them realized was that Emma's story had reached even higher circles than they imagined. Someone with very special connections to the royal household had heard about the brave American girl who dreamed of meeting the Queen's guards, and they were quietly making arrangements that would transform Emma's wish into something far more magical than anyone had dared to hope. The morning of departure arrived with a mixture of excitement and anxiety that filled the Morrison house like electricity. Emma had been awake since 4 in the morning, checking and rechecking her small suitcase to make sure she had packed her storybook, her collection of guard pictures, and the special scarf that Mrs. Patterson had given her as a bon voyage gift. "Do you think the guards will remember me from the video call?" Emma asked for the 20th time as Sarah helped her get dressed in her favorite blue dress, the one she had chosen specifically for meeting real British soldiers. "I'm sure they will, sweetheart," Sarah replied, though her own nerves were making her hands shake as she braided Emma's hair. The past week had been a whirlwind of medical appointments, passport photos, and final preparations. Dr. Chen had conducted extensive tests to ensure Emma was stable enough for travel, and while the results were encouraging, everyone understood that this trip was happening during a narrow window of time. David loaded their luggage into Tom Bradley's van, which would take them to the airport. Tom had insisted on driving them personally, saying he wanted to be part of Emma's story from beginning to end. The local newspaper photographer was waiting outside to capture their departure, having followed Emma's journey from the beginning. "This is really happening," David whispered to Sarah as they watched Emma pose for pictures, her thin frame nearly swallowed by her winter coat but her smile brighter than it had been in months. The airport experience had been carefully orchestrated to minimize stress for Emma. Sir Richard Pemberton's travel coordinator had arranged for them to use a private check-in area, and the airline had upgraded them to first class to ensure Emma would be as comfortable as possible during the 8-hour flight. Emma's eyes widened when she saw the airplane. She had flown only once before when she was 4 and barely remembered the experience. The flight attendants, who had been briefed about Emma's situation, treated her like a VIP, showing her around the cockpit and giving her a special set of wings to pin on her jacket. Are we really flying over the ocean to get to the guards? Emma asked as the plane began taxiing down the runway. We are, David said, holding her hand as the engines roared to life. And tomorrow morning we'll be in London. The flight passed better than anyone had dared hope. Emma slept for several hours, curled up under a blanket with her storybook clutched against her chest. When she was awake, she pressed her face to the window, marveling at the clouds below and asking the flight attendants endless questions about flying. Dr. Mitchell had arranged for a medical transport team to meet them at Heathrow Airport, just as a precaution, but Emma walked off the plane under her own power, chattering excitedly about everything she was seeing. The British accents of the airport staff delighted her, and she kept asking her parents if everyone in London talked like the people in her favorite movies. Mrs. Hensley was waiting for them in the arrivals area, holding a sign with Emma's name decorated with drawings of guards and crowns. She was an elegant woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a warm smile that immediately put Emma at ease. "Welcome to London, Emma," Mrs. Hensley said, crouching down to Emma's level. "I'm Margaret, and I'm going to help make sure you have the most wonderful visit possible." The drive through London was like a guided tour designed specifically for an 8-year-old girl fascinated by royal history. Mrs. Hensley pointed out landmarks as they passed: Big Ben, the Houses of Parliament, Westminster Abbey, while Emma pressed her face to the window and tried to take in everything at once. "There's Buckingham Palace," Mrs. Hensley announced as they turned a corner, and Emma gasped at her first glimpse of the iconic building she had seen in so many pictures. "It's so much bigger than I thought," Emma whispered. "Do you think the Queen is home right now?" "She might be," Mrs. Hensley replied with a mysterious smile. "The Royal Standard isn't flying today, which usually means she's not in residence. But you never know with royal schedules." Their hotel was a charming boutique property, just a few minutes' walk from Hyde Park. Dr. Mitchell had arranged for medical equipment to be discreetly placed in their suite, including an oxygen concentrator and a wheelchair, though Emma insisted she felt strong enough to walk everywhere. "Tomorrow is the big day," Mrs. Hensley explained as they settled into their rooms. "Captain Whitfield and his men are very excited to meet you properly. They've prepared something quite special." That evening, as Emma slept deeply after her first day in London, Sarah and David stood at their hotel room window looking out at the city lights. The reality of what was happening still felt surreal. "She made it," Sarah said quietly. "A month ago, I wasn't sure she'd be strong enough for this trip, and here she is, sleeping peacefully in London." "Mrs. Hensley mentioned that they have some surprises planned," David said. "I wonder what else they have in store for her." Neither of them could sleep that night, partly from jet lag but mostly from anticipation. Emma had talked nonstop during dinner about meeting the guards the next day, practicing her curtsy and rehearsing the questions she wanted to ask. Her energy and enthusiasm were infectious, reminding them both of the spirited little girl she had been before her illness. At 3 a.m, Emma woke up and climbed into bed with her parents. "Is it time to meet the guards yet?" she asked sleepily. "Not quite yet, Princess," David whispered, "but soon. Just a few more hours." As Emma drifted back to sleep between her parents, Sarah sent a text message to Mrs. Patterson back in Ohio. "We made it safely. Emma is so happy. Tomorrow she meets her guards." The response came back immediately despite the time difference. "Give her a hug from all of us. We're so proud of our brave girl." Outside their hotel window, London was waking up to what would become one of the most extraordinary days in Emma's young life. At Wellington Barracks, Captain Whitfield and his men were making final preparations for a meeting that would exceed even Emma's wildest dreams about meeting the Queen's guards. But the biggest surprise was still to come, arranged by someone whose involvement in Emma's story would remain a closely guarded secret until the very last moment. Emma was dressed and ready by 7 a.m, despite Mrs. Hensley's gentle reminder that their appointment at Wellington Barracks wasn't until 10 o'clock. She had chosen her best dress, the blue one with tiny flowers that she had worn on the plane, and had insisted on wearing her special scarf from Mrs. Patterson. "Do I look proper enough to meet real guards?" Emma asked, spinning around in front of the hotel room mirror. "You look absolutely perfect," Sarah said, though her heart clenched at how thin Emma appeared in her dress. The past month of preparation and excitement had taken a toll on her already fragile body, but her spirit remained undiminished. The drive to Wellington Barracks took them through the heart of London, past the very places Emma had dreamed about for months. Mrs. Hensley had arranged for a photographer to document the day, understanding that these memories would need to last a lifetime. When they arrived at the barracks, Captain Whitfield was waiting at the entrance in full ceremonial uniform. Emma's eyes went wide as she saw him in person. He was even more impressive than he had appeared on the video call, his red tunic immaculate and his bearing perfectly military. "Good morning, Emma," Captain Whitfield said, offering a formal bow. "Welcome to Wellington Barracks. The men are very excited to meet you properly." Emma attempted her practiced curtsy, wobbling slightly but managing to complete it with dignity. "Thank you for inviting me, Captain Whitfield. I've been looking forward to this for so long." The tour began in the guard room where several guardsmen were waiting to meet their special visitor. Each man was in full dress uniform, and they had arranged a display of their ceremonial equipment for Emma to examine. She was fascinated by everything: the weight of their bearskin caps, the precision of their movements, the history behind their traditions. "Would you like to try on a cap?" Guardsman Thompson asked, carefully lifting one of the iconic black hats. Emma nodded eagerly, and the guardsman helped her put on the cap, which was comically large on her small head, but which she wore with obvious pride. The photographer captured her beaming smile as she stood surrounded by the tall guards, looking like a tiny commander reviewing her troops. "Now I understand why you have to be so tall," Emma said seriously. "These hats are really heavy. My neck is already getting tired." The guards demonstrated some of their ceremonial movements, showing Emma the precision required for the changing of the guard ceremony. She watched with complete fascination as they performed their drill, asking questions about every aspect of their routine. "Captain Whitfield," Emma said during a quiet moment, "Mrs. Hensley told me we're going to watch the changing of the guard ceremony later. Will you be there?" "Actually, Emma, we have something even more special planned for you," Captain Whitfield replied. "But first, there's someone who would like to meet you." Emma looked puzzled as Captain Whitfield led their group to a different building within the barracks complex. They walked through several corridors lined with portraits of military officers and regimental battle honors, finally stopping outside an elegant door marked "Private." "Emma," Mrs. Hensley said, kneeling down beside her, "sometimes, when a little girl is very brave and very special, extraordinary things happen. There's someone inside this room who has heard about your courage and wanted to meet you personally." The door opened and Emma gasped as a woman in an elegant blue coat stepped out. Even at 8 years old, Emma recognized her immediately from countless photographs and stories. It was Catherine, the Princess of Wales. "Hello, Emma," the princess said warmly, crouching down to Emma's eye level. "I've heard so much about your journey to meet our guards. You must be very brave to have traveled all the way from America." Emma was speechless for a moment, staring at the princess with wide eyes. Finally, she managed a shaky curtsy and whispered, "Your Royal Highness, it's really you." "It really is," the princess laughed gently. "And I understand you know quite a lot about our royal guards. Captain Whitfield tells me you're something of an expert on their ceremonies." Emma found her voice and began talking excitedly about everything she had learned, about her storybook and her collection of pictures, about how brave she thought the guards were. The princess listened with genuine interest, asking questions and sharing some stories of her own about royal ceremonies she had attended. "I have something for you, Emma," the princess said, producing a small wrapped package. "It's from my children. When they heard about your story, they wanted you to have this." Inside the package was a beautiful leather-bound book about the history of the royal guards, signed by Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. Emma held it reverently, running her fingers over the signatures. "They wrote me a letter too," Emma said shyly, pulling out the card that had been tucked inside the book. The princess helped her read it aloud. "Dear Emma, we think you're very brave. We hope you love meeting the guards as much as we do. Get well soon. Love, George, Charlotte, and Louis." Sarah and David stood frozen in disbelief, watching their daughter converse naturally with one of the most famous women in the world. The princess spent nearly an hour with Emma, looking at her collection of guard pictures, hearing about her treatments, and sharing stories about royal life that made Emma giggle with delight. "Now, Emma, I have one more surprise for you," the princess said. "Instead of watching the changing of the guard ceremony from the usual viewing area, how would you like to watch it from a very special place?" 20 minutes later, Emma found herself standing on a private balcony overlooking the forecourt of Buckingham Palace, with the princess beside her and her parents close by. Below them, the full ceremony was about to begin, but Emma had the best seat in the house. "This is where we watch from sometimes," the princess explained. "You can see everything perfectly from here, and you won't get tired from standing in the crowd." As the ceremony began, Emma was transfixed. The guards she had dreamed about for so long were marching in perfect formation below her, their movements precise and ceremonial. She could see Captain Whitfield among them, and when he glanced up during a pause in the ceremony, he gave her a subtle nod that made her beam with pride. "They're so beautiful," Emma whispered, watching the red-coated guards with their gleaming instruments and perfect timing. "It's even better than I imagined." The princess stayed for the entire ceremony, pointing out details and explaining the significance of different movements. When it was over, she had one final surprise. "Emma, the guards have prepared something special just for you," the princess said. "Look down at the forecourt." Below them, a small group of guards had formed up in the courtyard. Captain Whitfield stepped forward and, in a voice that carried clearly to the balcony, called out, "3 cheers for Emma Morrison, our honorary guard." "Hip, hip!" "Hooray!" came the response from the assembled guards. "Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray!" Emma's eyes filled with tears of joy as she waved down at the guards who were cheering for her. The princess handed her a silk handkerchief to wipe her eyes. "Thank you," Emma whispered to the princess. "This is the most wonderful day of my whole life." "You've brought joy to a lot of people, Emma," the princess replied. "Sometimes when someone shows as much courage as you have, it reminds all of us what's truly important." As they prepared to leave the palace, Emma clutched her new book and looked back at the balcony where she had watched her dream come true. She was tired but exhilarated, her cheeks flushed with excitement and happiness. "Mom, Dad," she said as they walked back to their car, "do you think the other kids at the hospital will believe me when I tell them about today?" "They might need to see some pictures to believe it," David said, thinking about the dozens of photographs that had been taken throughout the day. That evening, back at their hotel, Emma called Mrs. Patterson using the video chat on her parents' laptop. She spent an hour telling her about meeting the princess, about watching the ceremony from the palace balcony, about the book signed by the royal children. "You are the most famous patient this hospital has ever had," Mrs. Patterson said, wiping away tears. "We're all so proud of you, Emma. You've shown everyone what real courage looks like." As Emma fell asleep that night, still wearing her special scarf and clutching her new book, she was already making plans for tomorrow's adventures. Mrs. Hensley had promised a boat ride on the Thames and afternoon tea at a fancy hotel, but nothing could top the magic of this day when a little girl's simple wish had been transformed into something far more wonderful than she had ever dared to dream. The remaining days in London passed like a beautiful dream. Emma's energy seemed to be sustained by pure happiness as she experienced afternoon tea with tiny sandwiches and fancy cakes, a private tour of the Tower of London where she met the famous ravens, and a boat ride along the Thames where she saw the city from the water just as she had imagined. But it was on their final morning, in London, that something unexpected happened. Dr. Mitchell had scheduled a routine checkup before their flight home, just to ensure Emma was stable for travel. What she found during the examination left her puzzled and excited. "Emma's vital signs are remarkably strong," Dr. Mitchell told Sarah and David privately while Emma played with toys in the examination room. "Her energy levels, her appetite, even her color. Everything seems significantly improved from the medical reports I received before your arrival." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, afraid to hope for too much. "I can't make any definitive statements based on one examination," Dr. Mitchell cautioned. "But sometimes in pediatric oncology, we see what we call rally periods where a child's condition stabilizes or even improves temporarily. The psychological benefits of this trip, the joy, the excitement, the sense of purpose, may have triggered some positive physiological responses." The flight home was bittersweet. Emma chattered constantly about her adventures, showing her book to fellow passengers and telling anyone who would listen about meeting the princess and watching the changing of the guard. But as the airplane descended toward Ohio, reality began to set in for Sarah and David. They were returning to hospitals and treatments, to uncertainty and difficult decisions. However, something remarkable continued to unfold in the weeks following their return. Dr. Chen was amazed by Emma's latest test results during their first appointment back home. "I need to run these tests again," Dr. Chen said, studying Emma's blood work with a furrowed brow. "These numbers are significantly better than anything we've seen in the past 6 months." The repeat tests confirmed what seemed impossible. Emma's cancer markers had decreased dramatically, and her immune system showed signs of strengthening. While Dr. Chen was careful not to use words like remission or cure, she cautiously began to discuss adjusting Emma's treatment plan. "Sometimes," Dr. Chen explained to the family, "the human body surprises us. Stress reduction, improved mood, a sense of purpose and joy. These things can have real measurable effects on immune function and healing." Emma's trip to London may have provided exactly the kind of psychological boost her body needed to begin fighting more effectively. Mrs. Patterson was the first to suggest that Emma's story should be shared more widely. The local newspaper wanted to run a follow-up article about the trip, and soon regional television stations were calling for interviews. Emma, now stronger and more energetic than she had been in months, enjoyed telling her story to reporters and showing off her signed book and photographs. The story spread beyond Ohio when Captain Whitfield shared updates about Emma's improved condition with his colleagues in London. Mrs. Hensley's foundation began using Emma's story as an example of how fulfilling a child's dream could have benefits far beyond simple happiness. But the most unexpected development came 6 months later, when Emma's cancer was officially declared to be in complete remission. Dr. Chen still couldn't fully explain the dramatic turnaround, though she suspected that the combination of cutting-edge medical treatment and the psychological boost from the London trip had created the perfect conditions for Emma's recovery. Medical science can take us a long way, Dr. Chen told a gathering of pediatric oncologists where she presented Emma's case. But sometimes the power of dreams fulfilled and joy experienced can take us the rest of the way. Emma, now 9 years old and cancer-free, started a new tradition. Every year on the anniversary of her trip to London, she and her parents would video call Captain Whitfield and the guards who had made her dream come true. She would update them on her progress, show them her latest school projects, and share her dreams for the future. The Princess of Wales, who had kept in touch through her private secretary, sent Emma a special message on her first cancer-free anniversary. "Your courage and joy continue to inspire everyone who knows your story. You've shown all of us that miracles can happen when people come together with kindness and hope." Emma's room at home became a shrine to her London adventure, filled with photographs, souvenirs, and the leather-bound book that remained her most treasured possession. But more importantly, her experience had taught her family and community about the power of reaching out to help others. David and Sarah established a small fund to help other families in their situation travel to fulfill their children's dreams. Tom Bradley donated travel planning services, and even Sir Richard Pemberton, who had heard about Emma's recovery, contributed to ensure that other children could experience their own miraculous journeys. Mrs. Patterson, who had witnessed Emma's transformation from the beginning, often told new patients about the brave little girl who had dreamed of meeting royal guards and whose story proved that sometimes the impossible could become possible. Emma's story teaches us that hope is never wasted, Mrs. Patterson would say. Sometimes when we dare to dream big, and when good people come together to make those dreams come true, magic really can happen. Emma herself, now a healthy 4th grader who played soccer and studied ballet, never forgot the lesson her journey had taught her. When other children in the hospital asked her for advice about their own situations, she would tell them about the guards who cared enough to make time for one little girl's wish, about the strangers who became friends, and about the power of believing that good things could still happen even in the darkest times. "The most important thing," Emma would say, clutching her leather-bound book, "is to never stop hoping. You never know when your own miracle might be just around the corner." And in London, at Wellington Barracks, Captain Whitfield kept a photo on his desk of a small American girl, wearing an oversized bearskin cap, surrounded by British guards, her face glowing with pure joy. It served as a daily reminder that sometimes the most important battles they fought weren't on parade grounds or in ceremony, but in the hearts of those who needed to believe that courage and kindness could still change the world.